Oh, good morning. Hello, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How about yourself?
Not too badly. Let me just turn up the volume a slight bit. I had it down earlier. How do we do does I don't use this WebEx software too usually. Does the share work quite well for PDF?
Yeah. So you just there's just a bottom button that says share.
Okay,
So
I'll just keep the presentation open so when it's time for me to go, I will do it then.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, the biggest hurdle sometimes is just trying to get the presenter mode right. If you have more than one screen that you're working off of.
Oh, well, let's see what happens when it comes, eh? Let's hope I
Okay.
don't cause any troubles.
There we go. We'll work through it.
We've got to use a backup anyway.
Good morning.
Morning, Karin. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Good to hear that. See you.
Yeah,
Good
nice to
morning.
see you as well. Glad you could be able to make it today.
Always my pleasure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I'm trying to get my video to work properly here.
It's on, Tom. You just need to lower your camera a bit.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to get it to work.
So Tom, how should I introduce your topic?
So, yeah, I did a little, as we talked about before, I did a little deviation from the original topic, and I'm going to really focus on the dust storms and the dust season that we have just had, and try to put it in context of exactly how extreme it really is. And so basically a review of the 2025 dust season in El Paso, and basically, basically call it the exceptional 2025 dust season in El Paso.
Okay. Hello, welcome. Hello, good morning.
Morning.
Right. Well, I think we're at the 9 o'clock hour. And so, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Earth Day. Today is an interesting day to have our dust symposium on Earth Day. I didn't plan it that way, so it just so happened to be the luck of the draw. And so, just want to welcome everybody to the 2025 Spring Southern New Mexico Dust Symposium. My name is Armando Paz with the New Mexico Environment Department Air Quality Bureau. So it is a great pleasure to host today's Dust Symposium. We have a full agenda lined up. So I'm very excited for today. This is always one of the favorite parts of my work here. Bring everyone together at a time we're dealing with impacts of windblown dust more so than ever. This past dust season was pretty intense. So it seems like it came a lot earlier this year, early in January, and we're still experiencing some pretty intense dust storms here in April. And so, luckily today is a clear day, but it's kind of hit or miss whenever we get a clear day or when it's pretty intense or just kind of haphazard of dusty day. So I think we're kind of getting a little more desensitized in a sense to some of these more lower dust impact days, because a lot of these high intense dust events are making national headlines, and those are kind of what's taking a lot of the attention. So we're all coming together from different walks of life, as well as from different fields to bring our work together today. So that's one of the many joys I have of being able to host this dust symposium, is being able to bring everybody together today. And so just kind of depicting a good indicator of how widespread the dust is starting to impact us around the state of New Mexico. How the Albuquerque field office for the National Weather Service has issued, let's say, what so it's pretty getting pretty widespread with the dust impacts becoming more so up in the northern part of the state. So down here in the southern part of the state, we're pretty much ground zero for the really heavy dust storms here along the border of Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona. At the, I guess, can say the cusp of being bumped up to a drought severity to exceptional here in southern and Magdalena counties. So what does that mean? I mean, when we're getting more air. So like I mentioned, we have a lot of people here today that bring their good work, how we're all coming together to bring this common element of dust together. And so just a few ground rules as far as just to make the experience a little more easier. Don't have the biggest bandwidth here in my. If we need to kind of repeat or whatnot, feel free to let us know in the chat, or if any questions come up, feel free to get some time. And so if you can be able to keep your microphones off during the presentations, then we can be able to help with that bandwidth, and maybe the camera as well, just to kind of help provide a more streamlined experience without as much glitches. And so with that being said, hi. For the morning, we have Dr. Tom Gill from the University of Texas at El Paso. And today he'll be discussing the exceptional 2025 El Paso dust season, and how we're kind of it's more. Take it away, Tom.
Tom, you are muted.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, now let me share my screen. Were you able to see my screen when I shared it before?
We could see it, but it was not in full presented mode. We could see the
Okay,
computer screen.
okay, let me share my screen. Are you able to see the screen now?
We see the screen, but it's not in full presented mode. We see the PowerPoint, Tom.
You don't, do you see individual slides?
We see all the slides on the side.
Oh. Well, that's weird. I'm going to try it again. I'm going to do slideshow from beginning. How do you see it now?
We don't. Do you have two monitors?
No, I have only one monitor, and right now I see my screen. What do you guys see now?
The PowerPoint, but not as a presented mode.
Oh, that's very strange. Because do you see the slides changing now?
No.
What do you see on your screen? Because I see my presentation.
Just the first slide.
Do you see the first slide now?
Armando, I think you're muted.
We no longer see your screen.
Okay, let me try one more time here. Okay, now you guys can see me and hear me, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I assume I go to share content and share screen, correct?
Correct.
And I'm going to go to window. Oops, that's not it. We go back to my PowerPoint. Let me try stopping and restarting my PowerPoint. Maybe that will do it. When in doubt, I'll restop and restart.
If you need for me to go through your slides, I can do it too.
Yeah, actually, if this doesn't work, then you're right. Then you can put up my slides. That's why I sent them to you yesterday. That's a good point. Okay, what do you guys see now?
The same view, non-presenter mode.
Okay, now do you see slideshow now?
No.
Oh, that's really weird because I see my slideshow. Armando, it might be better than if you put up my slides that I sent to you. Can you put that in full screen mode, Armando?
This is full screen mode.
What do you guys in the audience see? Do you see the full screen?
I think we see it okay. It looks as a PDF, but it's better than what you had, Tom.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go with this. My name's Tom Gill. I'm at the University of Texas at El Paso. And given the exceptional nature of this year's spring dust season, I'm making a bit of a detour from the originally planned presentation to give a review of our dust season and what's going on. How do we move to the slides. Can you go to the next one, Armando?
Yes.
So the question is, has it truly been unusually dusty this year in El Paso and the surrounding area? Next one. Answer is yes. And so I'm going to go over today exactly why and how it has been so exceptional this year and look into some possible reasons behind it. Next slide. Previous one. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to look at just how bad it has been and when was the last time we ever had conditions like this. Next. We have had an unusually dusty and windy spring 2025 in El Paso, Las Cruces, the Chihuahuan Desert, as well as in the high plains of Texas to our east, and all the way up into Kansas and eastern Colorado. And I'm going to present some statistics about just how extreme and how bad it's been from the El Paso standpoint. Next. Here we see a NOAA satellite image of well, I would say the worst event we've had so far, March 18th. It was the longest lasting dust storm in a West Texas city, based on analysis of the data originally from Karin Ardon-Dryer, going back to at least 2000. Had the highest recorded hourly PM10 concentration in El Paso, and maybe in the state of Texas, going back to at least to the year 2000, if not in the record of recorded PM concentrations. Next. On March 18th, the 24-hour average PM 2.5 concentration at Chamizal was 228.6 micrograms per meter cubed. The 24-hour average PM10 concentration at Chamizal in El Paso, again, this is a 24-hour average, was over 2,000 micrograms per cubic meter. Next. So just a quick photo panorama of some of the dust storms that we've had. The craziness actually started out in February, but we had this weird event on March 3rd that came across from the west as a haboob, which is extremely unusual for the cold season. Next. There we see a somewhat closer in satellite image, and you can actually see the haboob structure coming across on March 3rd. Next. March 7th, the dust continued with sources from just below the New Mexico boot heel in Chihuahua. Next. March 11th, the dust was concentrated more in kind of the traditional dust source area in the Paleo Lake Palomas Basin, just southwest of El Paso and Juarez, blowing directly towards the city. Next. March 13th, dust continued. Next. March 18th was arguably the biggest and worst dust storm so far, where dust sources all over the Chihuahuan Desert were activated. You can see white sands blowing to the north of where the three states come together. You see Lordsburg Playa blowing to the west. You see areas near Janos, Chihuahua in the southwest, and pretty much everything in between was lifting off the ground and blowing as a Magungus dust storm. Next. Here is a closer up Sentinel-2 satellite image of one of those plumes of dust coming directly over the west side of the city of El Paso. This reminds me of some of the images I've seen of atmospheric rivers hitting land. I guess you could say this was an atmospheric river of dust hitting El Paso on March 18th. Next. There are some new satellite tools. There is a an AI tool available now through NASA that enhances the dust. And here we can see in that magenta color, the dust enhanced on April 1st, no fooling, directly over the El Paso, Chihuahuan desert borderland. Next. The dust continued last week. Here's an image from the new GOES-19 satellite that entered service on April 7th. And again, we see dust coming from all over the Chihuahuan desert, from Lordsburg, Playa in the northwest to Chihuahua in the south, and very dense over the El Paso, Las Cruces area. Next. April 18th, the next day, it continued more locally and directly over us. Next. And then finally, it culminated on the 19th, on Saturday, with this very bizarre and intense Haboob-style dust storm that still moved a lot of it south into Chihuahua and still affected Chihuahua over the weekend. Next. So, by National Weather Service definition, blowing dust or dust storm, or what I will call dusty weather, happens with visibility in dust or sand of 7 miles or less. The average number of dusty days per year in El Paso, from Karin Ardon-Dryer's work over the recent decades, is about 22. We've already had 26 dusty days this season to date in El Paso. So we're already over the annual average. We had 12 within a 30-day period. There have been over 106 total hours of dust so far this year in El Paso, peaking with over 71 hours of dust in a 5-week period in late February to early April. The last time that we had more hours of dust in 5 weeks was in 1972, so more than 50 years ago. Next. El Paso has had 9 full-fledged dust storms so far this year. The meteorological definition of a dust storm is visibility of 1/2 mile or less in dust. That's happened 9 times already this year in El Paso. Only back during the Dust Bowl 89 years ago in 1936 did we have more dust storms in a year. 1936 had 11, 1935 had 13. So only back in the Dust Bowl did we have more full-fledged dust storms in El Paso than we've had so far this year. Next. March 18th had 6 1/4 continuous hours of dust storm conditions in El Paso. That's likely the longest duration dust storm in any West Texas city in at least 25 years. The longest continuous observation of dust storm conditions was in West Texas. In West Texas was December 19th, 2012 in Lubbock, which was for 6 hours. Next. There have been 20 1/4 total hours of dust storm conditions so far this year in El Paso. That's more hours of dust storm conditions than there were in a recent 20-year period. From 2000 to 2021, there were only a total of 23 3/4 hours of dust storm conditions, and we're already over 20. So we've really already had decades worth of dust storm conditions just this spring. Next. The weather conditions, the meteorology associated with these dust storms has been typical. Basically, a cold front moving across the area from west to east with a surface and or upper air trough of low pressure to our north and crossing the area. It's a very typical setup for dust storms in our region, so not unusual there. Next. the National Weather Service summed it up. And again, this is very typical for dust storms in El Paso. On March 18th, a strong upper low into southwest Colorado with a trailing trough down through far western New Mexico, cold front moving across the area. So the weather patterns have not been unusual for the dust storms. Next. Particulate matter concentrations have been crazy. The maximum 1 hour particulate matter concentration was over 8,000 micrograms per cubic meter on March 18th at Chamizal. The maximum PM 2.5 was over 1,000 micrograms per cubic meter on March 3rd at Escarate. The hourly PM 10 has exceeded 1,500 micrograms per cubic meter. That's basically 10 times the daily limit on an hourly average on 16 different days. PM 2.5 has exceeded 350. That's 10 times the Clean Air Act 24-hour standard of 35 on 12 different days. On 8 different days, PM10 has been so high in an hour that even if there was 0 PM10 for the rest of the day, it would be over the 24-hour average limit. On 2 different days, the hourly value of PM 2.5 has again got to that value where the hourly value alone could be seen to create a daily exceedance. Next. This graph was put together by Karin, Ardon-Dryer. We've exceeded the previous maximum value, hourly value of PM 2.5 in El Paso on 2 days already this year. And again, if you look at the data going back to 2000, we've exceeded the previous maximum value of PM10 on 7 days already this year. Next. The ingredients for a dust storm are drought and wind. Next. If you look at the drought intensity, this is the North American Drought Monitor for the end of March. You see that the entire Chihuahuan Desert is in extreme to exceptional drought, and especially the area near and just below the border is in exceptional drought. That's certainly one of the keys. Next. Especially if you look at the top, this is the drought history for Chihuahua. A rapidly intensifying exceptional drought in Chihuahua, Mexico is certainly part of the reason that we're getting this dust. Next. The wind direction has been pretty much ideal for dust storms. This is the wind rows for the month of March from the west to the southwest. When you see those magenta, light blue, and brownish colors on the left-hand side of the wind rows, those are all high wind speeds enough to lift dust. And we've certainly had plenty of those coming out of the west to the southwest. Next. This is a heat map of the direction to which dust storms have come into El Paso over the past 30 years. And again, it focuses on that west to southwest direction, exactly in line of where the strong winds have been this spring. Next. Has it been windy this year? Yes. The average peak wind gust in all dust events in El Paso so far this year was 49 miles per hour. It appears to me, I'm not certain, but it appears to me that that was much higher than the long-term average winds during dust storms. The record goes back to 1947. So it appears that we've had stronger winds. Next. And in fact, this was the second windiest March on record in the United States overall, going back to 1940. Only March 1977 was windier in the United States. Next. And in fact, this was the windiest March in El Paso going back to 1964. So both in the United States as a whole and in our area, it was the windiest March in 50 to 70 years. Again, that's got to be a factor. Next. Let me quickly look at some of the impacts. Obviously on our health, those are yet to be determined. There have been multiple fatal car wrecks in the dust storms in our region. Next. Roadways have been closed due to blowing dust, and that basically stops deliveries. We live in an era of just-in-time delivery of goods and services, and those were stopped by many roads being closed for hours and hours during these dust storms. Next. There was apparently a very important football match that was supposed to take place in Juarez on Saturday that had to be postponed because the visiting team could not get to town because of the sandstorm. Next. And let's go through these really fast, Armando. There have been multiple cases of dust transported from our area towards other parts of Texas. Here we see the morning of March 14th. You see that band of dust, which was mostly originally generated from the Chihuahuan Desert, moving east across Texas. Next. There you see, and again, another one of these new satellite products, that band of dust originally from us. This was in earlier April, moving across the rest of Texas. Next. And again, there were events this spring, especially in March, where Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, Houston got hit by dust from our Chihuahuan Desert borderland. Historically, go back to the last one for just a moment. Historically, that does happen once in a while. I'd say, looking back at my records, less than every year. But this year, it happened multiple times. Next. There were multiple events of dirty rain and dirty snow from our dust being transported all the way to the other side of the country. This happens maybe up to twice per year, traditionally. It's happened at least 4 times this year, maybe 5 already. Next. Let's just go through these fast. Virginia, they had to make a graphic explaining why there was dustfall in Virginia. Next. Chicago, here you see our haze right over the Great Lakes area, centered in Chicago on the morning of March 15th. Next. And people in Chicago were noticing the unusually hazy sky. Again, thanks to our dust. It happened again on March 20th. March 19th into March 20th, the dust from West Texas was brought up to the northeast. People's cars and windows got dirty in Chicago after some of that dust rained out. Next. West Virginia. Next. North Carolina. Next. Iowa. Pretty much every event did that. And then finally, to cap it off, all the way to Canada, Ontario, Canada, on March 20th, had a dust cloud hit Ontario, covering vehicles with a rain of mud that originated in the Chihuahuan Desert on March 18th. So next, to conclude, yes, it really has been a dust season for the record books in El Paso. It's been the worst in decades, if not going all the way back to the Dust Bowl 90 years ago. The ongoing drought is the most extreme in several decades. The wind was the worst in at least decades, more like 50 years plus, part of a national phenomenon. The number of full-blown dust storms that we've had so far this year was only exceeded during the Dust Bowl of the mid-1930s. We've literally had decades worth of dust storm conditions already this spring. Particulate matter concentrations appear to be the highest ever recorded in El Paso. Multiple times already this spring, they have been higher than hourly levels measured by the TCEQ in any previous year. The effects of our dust storms have been notable. They've been unusual. They're still coming in. And the impacts of this year's dust season, which is still not over, are likely to continue to be strong and felt for a long time. And so with that, in the interest of time, I'll conclude. Thanks, unfortunately, to those glitches at the start. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Gill. That was very interesting. Oh man, there was a lot of information in that. I'm gonna have to go back through that presentation to unpack that a little bit because yeah, that's kind of why I feel like I'm so busy this past year with all these dust and the servers that have been issued. So with that, I appreciate your participation with. And so her name is Shaila Nazneen, and she's also with the University of Texas at El Paso. And the topic will be investigating the effects of PM 2.5 and climatic variables on daily diagnosed COVID-19 cases in El Paso County, Texas. And so go ahead and take it away, Shaila.
Hi, good morning. I have like a kind of like unstable internet, so I'm gonna like make the video off so the presentation get a bit better. So I'm kind of like trying to share my screen.
Yeah, not seeing your screen. Okay, there you go.
Is it full screen now?
Yes, but not in presenter mode.
Like, can you share the full screen? Is it a presentation mode?
No, we see it in non-presenter mode.
Now, is it better?
Not seeing your screen. There we go. Just need a.
Is it full screen now? Is it like presenting? Is it presentation mode, or you can still see the side slides?
I can still see the slides.
Mm. Would you mind please share the one I sent you?
Okay, I can go ahead.
Like that's not updated, but that's okay.
I can share. There we go.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Shaila Nazneen. I'm a PhD candidate and in Environmental Science and Engineering program at the University of Texas, El Paso. And I'm presenting one of my thesis topic that's like investigating the effect of PM 2.5 and climatic variable on daily diagnosed COVID-19 cases that has been reported in El Paso County, Texas. Next slide. So that's a brief outline for my presentation where I'd be talking more about like a brief background and rationale of my study, methodology results, and discussion why what we got found and what was the limitation of our study. And thank you, Dr. Gill, for like kind of sketching out a beautiful portrait of the background of why PM and dust is important for El Paso and the health situation in El Paso. So air pollution, it's basically, according to literature, is like fifth leading cause of global mortality. And according to WHO, like 99% of global population, we live in a place that fails to meet the standard air quality guidelines set up by WHO. In 2012, around 3 million premature mortality were attributed to air pollution. That kind of like increases over the time, and like in 2019, WHO reported that 4.2 million premature mortality were due to air pollution. And um, we know about like the six criteria: air pollutants, particulate matter, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, lead, and um, particulate matter is kindly like identified as the significantly correlated with global illnesses according to EPA. There are multiple kind of particulate matter, PM 2.5, 10, and PM course. I'm not gonna go into depth, but like next slide, please. Next slide, please. But for this study, the previous one. So for this study, we kind of focus on the PM 2.5 because PM 2.5, it's like it has more surface area to volume ratio. So it's capable of binding with like it provides more surface area to bind with hazardous elements like heavy metal and like other kind of uh, other kind of like organic compounds, and that can like enter into the bloodstream, and because of its small particle size, and it also can cause like health impacts because it's so small in size that it can bypass throat, nose, and it can like penetrate the bronchial tubes and alveoli within the lungs, and that can basically impair the function of heart, lung, and basically every all organs, and adversely impact the human health. And it also been like evident that through studies that even like at the annual average permissible level, which is like 5 microgram per meter cube set by the 2005 WHO guideline, PM 2.5 can still accelerate the health hazards. So this study focused on PM 2.5. Next slide, please. So along with certain other environmental factors like ambient air temperature, humidity, and weather condition, PM is like potential contributor to the transmission of PM 2.5, and it also like kind of helps in the overexpression of the receptor ACE2 that's used by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and that like increase the vulnerability of the human being to the infection to COVID-19. And several research shows like even if 1 microgram meter cube increase in PM 2.5 is kindly associated with like 8 times more rise in COVID-19 mortality. And it also, according to like studies, it says like it's more like more people who are more exposed to PM 2.5 concentration are more prone to have mortality rates for COVID-19 as opposed to the areas with lower pollution level. And according to WHO, the statistics are here as of March 16, 2025, US has like more than 103 million confirmed COVID-19 cases and more than 1.2 million deaths that has been reported. Next slide, please. So why El Paso? I think Dr. Gill made it very evident in his study, like why it is important, because El Paso is more frequent to dust even due to its location within the Chihuahua. It's one of the most dust-borne areas in North America, and during the dry and windy season, it has more elevated level of PM10 and PM 2.5, and it also reduced the visibility, and wind speed also contributed to that. And these dust events are significantly like affecting the health of the citizens, like the residents in El Paso, and increasing the hospitalization for both respiratory illnesses and cardiovascular conditions. Next slide, please. So what's the rationale? Rationally is like there is no previous study explicitly addressing the relationship between PM 2.5, higher wind speed, visibility like these climatic variables, and their association, like their correlation with uh, their association with COVID-19 cases with the context of dust in El Paso County. So our study, it kind of like aims to investigate the dynamic relationship between maximum daily PM 2.5 exposure, daily maximum wind speed, and maximum minimum visibility, all factors which are kind of related to um, wind-blown dust events and COVID-19 cases in El Paso for from March 2020 to November 2021, which is basically the early stage of the pandemic. So this is a retrospective longitudinal study that has been done on the health hospitalization information on of El Paso residents, and the study period, as I mentioned, like March 2020 to November 2021. And for this study, we have like used secondary data that's secondary data sets, that's like COVID-19 hospitalization data for the study period that we collected from the El Paso County, Texas Department of Public Health database. Hourly particulate matter PM 2.5 data was obtained from Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ website. And we got 4 active TCEQ camps station data for this study. And for the hourly meteorological data, like temperature, relative humidity, visibility, and other variables, that's and those information were retrieved from the ASOS automated surface observing system operated by National Weather Service in El Paso International Airport Station. And for this study, the softwares we use Python R version 4.3.1, and ArcGIS Pro was used for this study. So this is a visual representation of the stations, the data we collected from the TCEQ station and the National Weather Service station for the weather variable data. Next slide, please. So the statistical analysis for this study, we did a time series analysis where we used a generalized linear model with a Poisson model was applied mostly to investigate the association between the variables. And here the dependent variable was COVID-19 morbidity, and all the climate variables and PM 2.5 was the independent variable, and they were like plotted individually to visual their relationship with the daily diagnosed COVID-19 cases. And time series, we use time series because it's for like 21 months data, and that kind of helped us to model long-term trends and seasonal patterns. And this is the model formula we used for the model. For the next slide, please. So the results, this table shows a descriptive statistic of the COVID-19 patients in El Paso County. The total number of 156,299 patients information was taken and analyzed for this study, as it's shown like majority, like 53.4% patients fall under the productive age group, that's like 15 to 44 percent, and 15 to 44 years, and 51.4% patients reported as like female. Next slide, please. And this is a figure that shows like the COVID-19 morbidity ratio per 100,000 residents, and it's for like each U.S. Census tract in El Paso County. ArcGIS software was used to calculate and create this map. This map shows like higher morbidity rates are like along the edges of the county, especially on the far east side. If you could see like the darkest area, that shows like the highest concentration, and it kind of like gives a portrayal of a better representation of like comparison between different areas with population density and clearly the darkest area, the Far East region, it shows like in term of like morbidity rates, this region has the highest number of COVID-19 cases per 100,000 residents. Next slide, please. And this is like a temporal distribution of like PM 2.5 concentration, which is like marked as a blue trend, and the red one is COVID-19 cases, just to overlap and to see the trend of PM 2.5 and COVID-19 cases over the study period of that 21 months. Next slide, please. This table shows the descriptive statistics of maximum hourly PM 2.5 and other weather variables like maximum daily wind speed, minimum daily visibility in kilometer, daily temperature, and average daily relative humidity. And that this table shows like the minimum and maximum values where daily, hourly PM 2.5, the minimum value, it goes as low as 6.4 to maximum daily value up to 409 for that time period, like for the study period. Next slide, please. And then we ran, as I mentioned, like we ran a Poisson model that indicated that maximum PM 2.5, this is a like the relationship between like maximum PM 2.5 and COVID-19 risk ratio of COVID-19. It says like relative risk estimate and the 95 confidence interval of COVID-19 per change of 10 unit in maximum PM 2.5. That shows like over a span of 7 days, an increase in 10 unit of maximum PM 2.5, like in lag day 1, lag day 2, and lag day 3, there is increase in PM like COVID-19 cases, and that kind of like decline from lag day 4 onwards. Next slide. This is the second slide that shows the lag response of a 10 unit increase. That's like 4.47 meter per second increase in maximum wind speed. Causes like an increased risk ratio of COVID-19 case only on lag day 4, and then the risk ratio decreases afterwards. And the last one, it shows reduction in minimum visibility of about like 4.8 kilometer was correlated with an increased risk of COVID-19 cases on lag day 1 and 2, and then it's kind of like decreased till 3, 4, and 5, and then on lag day 6 and 7, the risk ratio increases along with the minimum visibility. The next slide, please. So the take home, like the findings, it's like an increase of 10 unit increase in PM 2.5 level that is associated with higher risk of COVID-19 cases in El Paso. A maximum 10 unit, that's 4.47 meter per second escalation in maximum wind speed is associated with elevated risk, and also a 3 unit 4.83 kilometer decrease in minimum visibility correlates with a substantial rise in COVID-19 cases. And there are literature that supports the findings that's mentioned here. Next slide, please. So how that's like kind of related to El Paso, because a study done by Grenesky in 2011 that demonstrated that on a dusty event in El Paso, any individual of any age group is kind of like 1.1 times more likely to be hospitalized for respiratory diseases as opposed to a clear day or non-dusty day. So because El Paso has so much frequent dust events and storms that are associated with elevated wind speed, decreased visibility, and elevated PM level, and these dust intrusions kind of like impact both the incidence of COVID-19 cases and hospital like admission rates over different lag periods. And El Paso dust events are also identified with like wind speeds that's more than 6 meters per second, and exposure to these events that can last between like 3 to 5 hours, that has significant correlation with hospitalization due to respiratory diseases. And it's like established through researches that research says like long-term exposure to PM 2.5, it worsen the PM 2.5 like respiratory conditions, it weaken the immune system, and making the people they are exposed to the dust are more susceptible to severe outcomes of COVID-19, as opposed to a person who is least or not exposed to any kind of dust or air pollution. And like these particles also triggers inflammation to the exposed people and to the respiratory tract, and that kind of like aids in the viral entry within the body and replication, ultimately kind of leading to more severe consequences among like infected infected individuals. And these finest particles like PM 2.5, it can penetrate through the respiratory system, as I mentioned earlier, leading to the increased inflammation and causes more vulnerability. And there are factors that basically exacerbates the effects of all these factors, and upsurge of COVID-19 in El Paso. It's basically like the geographic location, as I mentioned, within the Chihuahuan desert, frequent events of windblown dust, cross-border traffic from the adjacent city of Juarez, Mexico, and the overall like low socioeconomic condition of the overall population in El Paso. Next slide, please. So the limitation of our study is like we use the hospitalization data that's used in this study record only had the cases that were positive for COVID-19 cases. So we lacked the information, leaving behind the information of the patients who had the symptoms but tested negative for COVID-19 cases. So we don't have a comparison group. So since we don't have a comparison group, it's not like more, we lack the generalizability um, of the result, and then we lack the information that on exact date of exposure or exact date of onset of the symptom of the disease. And the data set is like very time constricted for like first 20 months of the pandemic, and then afterwards vaccine came and other measures came, and that kind of like reduced the cases and mortality as well. So maybe the time restriction thing and introduction of the vaccination, maybe both can reduce the reproducibility of the study results for the next period of the time. And finally, the data we use that were collected from different sources, and subsequently we merge different data sources in one single cohesive data set to get to see how the association works and stuff. But since we are bringing up different data sets into one single data set, introducing a potential inconsistency and bias to our results by like combining data from different sources. Next, please. Next slide, please. So the conclusion would be like from the finding we see like it's very important, it's crucial to consider environment and other factors in future public health planning and understanding. It's very crucial to develop like public health strategies to mitigate the spread of the virus. And the mitigation strategies should include like implement early warning signs for like system for dust events, promoting the use of masks during high dust period, and ensuring adequate indoor ventilation. Next slide. So I guess these are my references. Thank you so much. And if you have any question.
Great. Thank you, Shaila. That was very interesting. We're in the COVID-19 cases in regards to the PM 2.5 exposures. The 2020 and 2021 years, those were some pretty bad years that we were experiencing that. So let's see. Presenter here today with Magdalena Muir with the Arctic Institute of North America and Bamfield Marine Sciences Center.
Can you see my screen?
Research for Western Canada with a focus on British Columbia, Alberta, and Western Arctic region of Northern Canada. With that said, go ahead and take it away, Magdalena.
Okay. You know what? It won't display my shared content. Can you actually open my PowerPoint in PDF and we'll just go through it? And I apologize, but it seems to be a restriction with the web software for me at least. Thanks very much. So I'm going to be talking a bit about a bit different topic than I've noticed from this cross section of presentations, but I'm going to talk about dust issues and research with Western Canada, but I'm going to focus on British Columbia and Alberta and a Western Arctic region of North America. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what I wanted to start with is just a few reflections. My background originally was more dealing with Arctic and climate issues and transboundary pollution. So at least with respect to Canada, that's kind of it can be kind of a complicated situation for the areas I'm looking at. So there's a lot of interactions with the industrial dust research, but also other areas of research, including transboundary pollutants, climate, and black carbon. And I'll talk a bit about these separately when I go through it. And then there's really the sensitivity of the mountainous regions and the Arctic environments to both dust and black carbon. Dust, as you're referring to, industrial dust from deserts, but also black carbon being the non-totally consumed portion of a hydrocarbon, either or even a fire situation. Now, I do have a question, and this is something maybe I'll get a better sense of by the end of this, is whether when people talk about dust, they're really dealing only with dust that originates in deserts, or whether it can include dust at the end of glaciation, which is like glacial flower, or dust resulting or in conjunction with wildfires, or even human activities such as farming, infrastructure, and mining. Because when I start looking at the issues of dust and the research that's been done so far on dust in Canada, all these categories get considered as well. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd start just by looking at a couple of the transports of, even though Western Canada, particularly British Columbia, Lower Mainland, is quite remote from the Sahara, there have been instances of, documented instances of transport of Saharan dust to the Western North America. And one example was done in 2005. This was documented in 2007. But it was the finding of this in the Whistlers area of Vancouver. What's interesting somewhat about this is that it's novel somewhat, but it also indicates that a lot of the dust contamination that's international transboundary desert dust tends to be periodic or episodic. And this is actually true not just in the Lower Mainland area, but also into the Arctic. Next. And so this is just some indication talking about, and what you would expect would be more typical, and this would be, especially for the Arctic, is that you're going to get a lot more dust coming in from Eastern Asia. And that's due basically a combination of the jet stream and also the circulatory patterns that you have in those areas. Next slide. One of the areas that I really was focusing on, because one of the concerns you really have when you start looking at dust in Canada is there's a lot of different factors to consider. I live in Calgary myself, and that's a very arid area, and we have periods of dust or even risks of increasing desertification with climate change. But right now, a lot of stuff is really occurring in relation to particulate matter with wildfires. And that's because if you see this area here where they look at the forest fire perimeter for this period of time, this is arboreal forest region, and this is becoming dry. And so you're going to starting to have a lot more fires. In some cases, particularly in the northern region, you're having fires that are occurring of the peat moss and permafrost, and also the creation of what are called zombie fires that never really go out and just burn underground and then flare up the next year. So the fire is one of the big contributors. Now, it appears to me that what's the direct product of wildfire would more probably fall within the black carbon category, but dust is released also in accordance with these widespread wildfires and is the after effect of a burned landscape. Next slide. And this is just looking at some of the health impacts of the PP 2.5 from wildfire smoke. And as you can see, both for Canada and the US, it's really kind of focused around BC, Alberta, and the areas immediately below. And this would make a lot of sense because we have a lot of movement of our wildfires into the United States. And also where I live in Alberta, we're very affected by wildfires from the Pacific Northwest to California, Oregon, Washington. Next slide. And this is just looking at somewhat of the wildfire radioactive power. Next slide. So one thing I thought was interesting, because we're starting to talk about transboundary, and you have to appreciate my focus was first looking at some of the transboundary dust, and this was partly because I used to work in the Mediterranean, so I would experience some of the different windstorms that would come there off the Africa into the Mediterranean. So as you see, this is kind of the other side, which is it just shows how the movement of fire occurs from the Western Canadian wildfire. And this is at this point going all the way to Nova Scotia and southwestern United States. Next slide. And this is I can't really show this in the PDF, but this was an active animation that really shows the significant smoke transport of these Western Canadian fires into Europe in 2024. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a bit about dust research in Arctic Canada, and I suspecting it's quite different from how the dust focus or discussion occurs within the southwestern United States. So far, we've got a more limited monitoring of dust in Arctic Canada, and there are some studies, but there's a lack of clarity of the volumes of the transboundary dust in the Arctic, particularly from Asia. It appears not to be ongoing, but more episodic and on an annualized basis. There are quite significant local concerns of dust, but it's in relation to open pit mining, and the impact of remote roads. And I should mention for Western Canada, that kind of stuff is coming up with mining and also with respect to agriculture operation. One thing that really interests me, and probably where I'm going to focus on, is really that interaction between dust and climate change. And there is a discussion of whether the presence of dust in the air reduces or enhances climate warming, because it might actually, either it's acting as a cooling because it precipitates cloud and moisture, or whether in some way it correlates with it. Also, and this is really because I've worked extensively in climate issues, particularly in northern Canada and the Circumarctic. If we start looking at things such as roads causing dust, because then you've exposed a very vulnerable environment, then increased development, including road infrastructure, will cause it. Once you start looking at permafrost in some regions of the Arctic, and I'm thinking of the Beaufort Sea where I've worked very extensively, it's largely sand and fine particulate matter frozen. So as you end up having more permafrost degradation or melting, you're going to also have the greater release of contaminants in those areas. And lastly, with the respect to the wildfires, when you look in northern Canada, particularly in many areas, there's quite extensive peat moss that is contained in the forestry, in the boreal forest, or in the tundra. And then again, as that one warms up, there's be more dust released through the wildflowers and the adjacent exposure. If we can just go to the next slide, I just wanted to give you an example of where there's been some mining. So we've got one a large open pit mine in Mary River Iron Mine in Baffin Island, and I've done some work on this in a variety of areas, but it's a very interesting one because it's a very high concentration of ore. So what they do is they actually open pit mine it on site, break it up, and then transport it away. It's not processed. It's actually it's one of the highest concentrations they've ever had for a mine. So what's happening is the local residents are finding there's very fine red particulate matter in the vicinity and quite extensive vicinity of this mine, and that's affecting the use of water, the use of resources. Is affecting wildlife. So there's starting to be quite a bit of concerns from dust impacts, and I think this is an interesting representative impacts of how development in a fragile environment that opens up the surface to exposure and erosion can cause dust type issues. And with that, I'm going to thank you, Ed. And I tried to do it quite quickly too, to allow you to catch up to your schedule as well.
Great, thank you, Magdalena, for that information. It was very interesting to hear about the I guess the ice and the permafrost being a source of
Sure.
dust.
And I forgot to mention, I guess, but because I was kind of going it quickly, but when we start looking at mountains, there's a lot of parallel issues to the mountains in the Arctic, particularly with the impact of dust and black carbon, both in parallel acting as a melting agent and a contaminant.
Yeah, and with the more man-made impacts, you're going to start seeing more of that impact. Right. Thank you very much. And so, you can go ahead and go to our next topic. Nicholas Webb with the USDA-ARS Jornada experimental range. He's going to be discussing magnitude shifts in Aeolian sediment transport associated with degradation.
Thanks, Armando.
You're welcome.
Okay, is this coming through?
Yes.
Okay. Super. Success. So thanks everyone for coming today. I'm going to take a look at some field work that we've been doing at the Jornada experimental range here, just north of Las Cruces. And this study sought to sort of take an interdisciplinary approach to understanding patterns of sediment transport and dust emission on the landscape. And our goal was to quantify how Aeolian sediment transport rates change with ecological state changes on the landscape across certain sort of degradation and restoration pathways. And the title of my talk is the same as a paper that we recently published in JGR Biogeosciences. So if you want to take a look at that paper, this QR code will get you there, and I've got it again on the last slide. I'm just going to talk about sort of some of the main findings of the work, as it's quite a large paper, and then I'll finish up sort of talking about some of the implications of our work, which I think are important for a range of things. So I think around the world, mitigating wind erosion and sand and dust storms is really challenged by our understanding of what drives spatial and temporal patterns of wind erosion and dust emission across landscapes. And in the US here, over the last few decades, we've had a number of studies looking at sort of trends in dustiness and sort of temporal variability and dustiness, which have been related to climate variability and teleconnections, particularly ENSO and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, the relationship between dustiness and land use change, particularly looking at sort of cropland expansion, and the role of land cover change, including sort of modeling studies. And a lot of these sort of our land cover change analyses have depended on vegetation indices like NDVI, which really describe the greenness of vegetation and don't give us a good handle on how and why plant communities are changing across landscapes. And that's sort of our core interest here. So the maps on the bottom were produced by my colleague, Saruj Dittal, who's done an analysis of trends in plant functional group cover over the last few decades. And the map on the left shows statistically significant trends in perennial bulb and grass cover, and we have trends in woody cover, so that's tree and shrub cover on the right. And in the Chihuahuan Desert, we can see that from 2011 to 2020, there were really significant negative trends or declines in perennial bulb and grass cover and increasing woody cover in some of our dust source areas. So we anticipate that these changes in the composition of vegetation and their cover in the landscape are expected to influence the susceptibility of these landscapes to wind erosion and dust emission. In a land management context, we think about land cover change often in terms of how plant communities are changing, and we describe these as different sort of alternative ecological states on the landscape. And different ecological states have certain vegetation composition, certain cover of different plant species, and critically for wind erosion, different structure. So they have different heights of vegetation and different spatial arrangement on the landscape. And we can summarize ecological state changes using models like this, which we call state and transition models. And for a given site, so a given soil and landscape setting, we find that certain plant communities will be produced and they have certain ecological dynamics which are influenced by land use and management pressures and climate and so forth. So with the knowledge that changes in ecological states influence the cover and structure of vegetation, we'd anticipate that they would also influence the aerodynamic roughness of landscapes and the spatial and temporal patterns of that roughness. And we can use conceptual models like this to start to unpack why we see patterns of larger and smaller sediment transport and dust emission across landscapes. And we can then relate them to specific land use and management drivers on the landscape, which can help us interpret certain degradation pathways. And it can also help us to identify which management options might be most appropriate, potentially most successful, and which we might not want to bother attempting given the cost and low likelihood of success. So with this sort of model of understanding dust source areas in mind, this project had sort of three general objectives, which were to describe vegetation cover and structure changes associated with ecological state changes on a sandy sort of basin floor landform in the northern Chihuahuan Desert here, to quantify the magnitude and direction of sediment transport responses to these ecological state changes, and then see if we can identify some critical thresholds in sort of plant cover attributes at which we see certain changes, increases and decreases in sediment transport rates, representing different sort of degradation and restoration pathways that could inform management. So map on the left here shows our study area in grey. Our focus was sort of sandy basin floor landform. So this is sort of sandy and shallow sandy soils across the northern Chihuahuan Desert in the US. We combined data from a number of different studies, which I'll talk about on the next slide, but just here the points are essentially where we acquired data from. So some regional data, as well as some sort of intensive monitoring within the Jornada experimental range, which is this polygon here. Our focus was on describing changes in sediment transport rates in relation to vegetation cover and structure changes across a set of ecological states on this site. And the state and transition model on the right here shows the sort of states of interest, which I've got outlined in red. So across these landscapes shown in grey, we have areas where essentially the historic plant community was a grassland with black grama being the dominant sort of perennial grass. With shrub encroachment to these landscapes due to drought, overgrazing, seed dispersal and so forth, we see honey mesquite popping up. We see a decline in the perennial grass cover, and with ongoing grazing pressure, opening up larger gaps, we see further declines in grass, perennial grass cover, a change in the grass composition, and increased Aeolian sediment transport rates, which initiate some positive feedbacks that favour shrub encroachment. leading us eventually to this a shrub-dominated state where we have essentially a mesquite shrubland with very large bare interspaces where we can have large friction velocities at the surface and sediment transport rates. Between 2007 and 2009, we had some wet years, and in some areas of shrubland on the Jornada experimental range and other locations in the region, we crossed a natural sort of restoration threshold, and we got grass establishment in these shrublands, which was fairly unusual, which provides us with a nice example of potentially sort of successful restoration, or the potential for successful restoration, I should say, in these systems where the shrubland state was generally, I think for a long time, regarded as sort of a terminal state that was very difficult to get out of. So we brought together data from a number of projects. Regionally, these green points on the map here represent monitoring locations that have been monitored by the Bureau of Land Management as part of the Assessment Inventory and Monitoring Program. So there are 142 monitoring plots as part of their program. We then set up in 2018 the Juneland Restoration Project specifically to understand this grass recovery event and seeing what we could learn from that event to inform restoration efforts. So we set up plots in the historic grassland, the shrubland state, and this novel sort of grassy shrubland state. We also included data from the National Wind Erosion Research Network site on the Jornada, which in 2014-15, when we established the plot, was in the shrub invaded state. It's since progressed in 2020 to a bunch grass shrub state and is now, after our dust events this year, effectively in the shrubland state. At all of the monitoring plots, we use the same sort of standardized vegetation monitoring methods. These are transect-based methods, line point intercept, and the canopy gap intercept and vegetation height methods. And collectively, these let us describe the plant functional group cover or species cover, the size distribution of bare spaces between vegetation, and the height of vegetation. And at these 4 plots, we also set up sort of 1 hectare monitoring sites in which we use modified Wilson and Cook sediment samplers to monitor the Aeolian sediment transport rates. So at the historic grassland, shrubland, and grassy shrubland site, we had 9 randomly located sampler masts, and at the Wind Erosion Network site, we have 27 of those. We also have a 10-meter meteorological tower to give us some sort of meteorological context for that particular location. So we did a range of sort of descriptive statistical type analyses, some Mann-Kendall trend tests on some of the data, and some sort of Kruskal-Wallis tests to look at magnitude shifts in the sediment transport rates. And I'm just going to give a high-level overview of some of our results. So sort of starting with the patterns of vegetation change, the graph in the top right here shows the coloured points are our 4 intensively monitored sites on the Jornada, sort of in the context of the 142 regionally monitored BLM plots. The 2 sort of takeaways from this are that our monitoring sites are representative of the distribution of sites regionally in the context of their sort of shrub cover and perennial grass and forb cover. And secondly, the grassy shrubland site, which underwent this sort of restorative transition, is somewhat novel in its composition in terms of its shrub cover and perennial forb and grass cover, which is what we expected. We didn't see very widespread recovery, only certain locations. Looking at the graphs below, I've just got bar graphs of the average cover of different cover types and the distribution of gap sizes, unvegetated gap sizes between plants, monitored across sort of 5 sampling events between 2018 and 24. So following our degradation pathway from our historic grassland down to the shrub invaded and sort of shrubland states, we generally see a dramatic decline in total foliar cover, massive decline to total loss of perennial forbs and grasses, same with total loss of perennial grasses, and an increase in shrub cover. Through this sort of degradation pathway, we also see a dramatic change in the distribution of vegetation with larger unvegetated spaces between the plants opening up. So we get a very large increase in unvegetated spaces greater than 2 meters in length. Following this sort of natural restoration event, we saw some recovery of the total foliar cover that was mostly perennial forbs and grasses. The perennial grass component was fairly small, but it has been persistent since 2009. Our monitoring location of this grassy shrubland had higher shrub cover than our shrubland state. But interestingly, we saw a dramatic reduction in large canopy gaps associated with perennial grasses and forbs essentially filling in the spaces between the mesquite shrubs. So moving to the sediment fluxes, the panel of graphs here shows measured horizontal sediment mass fluxes summarized by site in the different colors, or ecological state in the different colors, by sampling year and by season. And generally, we saw very consistent patterns in the magnitude of sediment transport across the different ecological states and across seasons. We found fairly consistent sort of base 10 order of magnitude shifts in the sediment transport rates, which is huge. And our sediment transport rates span 4, sometimes 5 orders of magnitude across these ecological state changes. So again, that's really huge. Sediment fluxes were largest in spring, consistent with our sort of dominant southwest, west-southwesterly winds. Looking at our mean sediment transport rates across from our historic grasslands to our shrub-invaded and shrubland states, we saw effectively an order of magnitude increase in the mean sort of spatial mean transport rates. We also saw extremely large spatial and temporal variances of the transport, and those temporal and spatial variances increased. These numbers here for the shrubland probably represent undersampling, and I don't expect they'd be in the millions like that. Interestingly, with our restoration event, sediment transport rates effectively shut down to levels consistent with the historic grassland. So even though we didn't get the same perennial grass species, this restoration event was extremely beneficial in reducing sediment transport and presumably dust emission as a consequence of these reduced transport rates. So if we look at the relationship between sediment transport and perennial grass cover across the ecological state, some really interesting patterns emerged, and we saw that there was some sort of critical perennial grass cover thresholds that were really governing these magnitude shifts in transport. So following our shrub invasion and loss of black grama, we saw our first order of magnitude shift in sediment transport occurring when cover dropped below about 20% perennial grasses. Transport rates increased to above another order of magnitude when they declined below about 10% perennial grass cover, and below about 5% cover, sort of all bets are off. And these data points on the left of the graph reflect what we measured across the shrubland state, which was enormous variability and extremely large sediment transport rates. So for context, the measurements at the top here are around 10,000 grams per meter per day. So were from, I think, the 2019 dust event, which was very large, but perhaps not as large as the recent events we've had this spring. We can explain these shifts in sediment transport rates sort of mechanistically by looking at drag partitioning across some of these sites. And the graph here shows some data from a study we published in 2023, in which we measured the drag partition across the wind erosion network site, which was sort of transitioning from the shrub invaded to the bunch grass shrub state. And we can compare those measurements with data collected by James King and colleagues, published in 2006, in which they measured drag partition in the shrubland state, shown up in the top here. So we have the maximum drag partition plotted against the average drag partition. Essentially, the smaller the value, the more momentum is being extracted from the wind. So essentially what we see is moving from our shrubland, bunchgrass shrub state to our shrubland state. We see a dramatic reduction in the drag partition, such that the shear velocity of the wind at the soil surface is being influenced very little by the surface roughness at the site. So as our sediment transport rates scale with the sort of the square or the cube of the shear velocity of the wind at the soil surface, these dramatic changes in drag partitioning effectively result in these non-linear order of magnitude increases in sediment transport following our degradation pathway. And similarly, with restoration, we can effectively shut down sediment transport by orders of magnitude due to these really dramatic increases in drag partitioning. So to wrap things up, this work, I think, has a number of implications for our understanding of sediment transport processes, modeling sediment transport processes, and how we think about using different tools to manage wind erosion and sand and dust storms. So at least in these sandy basin landforms, we see that ecological state really has primacy in determining patterns of wind erosion and dust emission. It's likely that sort of looking more broadly across the landscape, different soils and landforms, we would see different orders of magnitude shifts and perhaps no order of magnitude shifts or shifts following different bases rather than base 10 shifts. So it's really important that we get a good handle on what these shifts are and what's driving them and being able to link them to management options if we're going to really look at reducing wind erosion and dust emission regionally. In a dust modeling context, these results, I think, are really interesting and suggest we really need to focus on improving our dust emission schemes and parameterizing and calibrating our dust emission models to represent dust emission, not just dust in the atmosphere. So we've seen essentially 4 to 5 orders of magnitude variability in sediment transport rates across ecological states, which would typically in a dust model or land surface model all be classified into a single land cover class and assigned a single aerodynamic roughness, and therefore the model would not represent any of this variability. So it's important that we start thinking about how we can capture this variability if we're going to really improve the performance of our models. Our results have shown that from our natural sort of restoration event, that ecological restoration can really effectively mitigate wind erosion and dust emissions. The question really remains, how can we ensure successful restoration, essentially when we're not having rain, when we're having sort of increasing vapor pressure deficit across the region, so that the conditions are becoming harder and harder for us to effectively restore these landscapes. So what can we do? And I think this work has demonstrated nicely that examining or thinking about our wind erosion processes and our dust source areas in an ecological context can really help us think more about which options we might have available to help us avoid transitioning to a less desirable state where we see sediment transport increase, as well as selecting sort of management options that might help us reduce and perhaps even reverse patterns of wind erosion and dust emission. And finally, I think that this work probably has gives us some insights to what's been going on this spring in the context of the trends of declining perennial grass and forb cover that we've seen across the region, increasing shrub cover. It's very likely that we've been crossing some of these important thresholds and have seen much more of the landscape become susceptible to wind erosion and dust emission. We've definitely seen that across the Jornada experimental range, with big sand drifts forming this spring as a consequence of us crossing some of these thresholds combined with our strong winds. So I'll leave it there, and thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Dr. Webb. That was very interesting. And so it's just, I mean, that just kind of like is the other full end of the circle as far as solutions. Able to not go into a more or less desirable state, like you mentioned. So I don't know if anybody has any questions for Dr. Webb. You have some comments here in the chat from Morgan Gorris, and so just the comment was really like the story about the grass cover thresholds being important for restoration, conservation, and policy decisions. So she's wondering if you could elaborate more on the mesquite shrubland and how variable it was.
Yeah, I think the mesquite shrublands now in this area are extremely widespread and would be our dominant state. Looking across monitoring data sets collected by BLM and NRCS in the region, we have very, very few locations that are in that historic grassland state. So sort of thinking about restoration at this point in time, I think we need to be focusing on how can we minimize our losses in the sort of intermediate states where we have some remaining grasses. How can we avoid losing those grasses, which is extremely challenging given the sort of the drought context that we're in. The very large transport rates in the mesquite shrubland, I think, are really a consequence of that the sort of large spatial heterogeneity of the shrub states and the distributions of shrubs. And in the graph that I showed at the end really reflect measurements over time. So some months are windier than others. So when it's less windy, we still get sediment transport in these shrublands, but when it's very windy, we get huge transport rates.
Great, thank you. Scott, do you have a question? I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Nick, in the restoration effort, did you guys use con mods in there to help the seedlings get started, or was that a part of the experimental design?
Yeah, that wasn't part of the project when we established it. So that restoration event was a natural event following a few wet years, but we've subsequently incorporated con mods or connectivity modifiers into a subset of those plots in the Duneland Restoration Project to look at their effects. Yep, and we have a PhD student here at the Jornada who is just putting a paper together on the effectiveness of those con mods relative to sort of grass cover thresholds.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Webb. We do have another question, and this one is for Magdalena, our previous presenter before Dr. Webb. And so I don't know if you're you can be able to answer this, but this is from also from Oregon.
Sure, and I put a bit of answer in the question box, and I can follow up with a bit more information separately when I'm going to send back. I want to put a few changes to the PowerPoint, and I can put information of that in there. But we have an air quality, a good approach to air quality monitoring and pollution monitoring and networks with relation to that, but not the same degree of focus that you have, particularly with respect to dust. And I noticed this when I was actually trying to do this presentation, and that a lot of stuff comes more into other categories. So it's on parts per million, the 2.5, the microparticles, or it would be dealing with fire and relation to that, or generalized air quality and air quality mapping. But the specific focus on dust, whether it's industrial dust or transboundary dust or dust from local operations or local incidents, is not as clearly looked at because there's not the same tradition of dust storms yet. I suspect that will develop within Alberta, particularly because we're a highly arid area, particularly southern portion of Alberta, but there hasn't been the same pattern of dust storms.
Great, thank you. Right, well, we don't have any other questions. We do have about 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes break, and so I will be back to We'll be right back. Thank you. Well, those 4 minutes went pretty quick. I'm back, and so we're welcome Brandon Edwards with the Jornada experimental range. He's going to be talking about the Windblown in Mexico. So go ahead and take it away, Brandon. You're back from the break.
Yep, give me just a second, pulling up the presentation here. Okay, so what do I do, presenter map? I don't know. Share application. I'm trying to pull up the. Anybody got an idea why this won't work?
Do you need permission?
What do I do that in?
It came up with a window that said you needed permission. See?
It's not letting me share the PowerPoint, Armando.
All right, so maybe it will now that I moved you to the stage.
Ooh, I'm not seeing it.
Maybe you want to send me the PowerPoint and I can run it for you.
Okay.
Scott,
I
I sent
just-
you just
said
a
it.
PowerPoint file just in case it glitches on me too. So you should find that in your inbox.
I just sent it to you, so should be getting it in a second. Is about this. I'm wondering if it's because we're using the web browser version of WebEx.
I tried mine with both versions and had the same problem with both. So I think these are affecting everyone.
See?
Brandon, my approach was to open PowerPoint and put it in presenter mode first, and then share to the open presenter mode screen, and that seemed to work.
Okay. I can try that. Yeah. Where's presenter mode? Oh, do I know where presenter mode is?
Maybe it's like bottom right down by the Zoom. You can click the button just to the left of the plus and minus.
This one?
Nope. Or yeah, I guess so.
That one?
Looks like it, yeah.
That's reading view.
Oh,
Isn't it
the one,
that one?
that one, yeah.
That one?
Yeah.
But now I can't.
Now you can use the control and tab in the keyboard.
Control and tab.
And then, yeah.
What does control tab do?
Should bring up the other window. Yeah.
Control.
All right, so I got the presentation.
Okay, we'll go with that. Sorry. Oh.
All right, here we go.
Okay, sorry about the delay, everyone. Yeah, I'm not the most technically inclined when it comes to this sort of things, but we're just going to go over a little bit about some dust observations from the Lordsburg, Playa, New Mexico. So as Tom mentioned a few times in his presentation earlier, it can be a particularly active area. And obviously, those that keep up with the news, there have been a couple of significant accidents, one with fatalities there this year already, and the New Mexico Department Transportation has been undergoing a couple of years-long mitigation projects, looking at minimizing the hazard. So we go to the next slide, please. So we're going to present some on-the-ground data from 3 meteorological towers that are equipped with standard wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, meteorological instrumentation, as well as aerosol monitors. So those would be the 3 pins on the left of the picture. So we're looking at predominantly the western side of the Playa, although the National Wind Erosion Research Network site is adjacent to sort of the Playa basin, or the Playa proper, if you want to call it that. Next slide. So just to look at the wind patterns, this is data from that Edwarn site. We can see that we fairly frequently get pretty high wind speeds, as we can imagine, out there on the Playa. In terms of the directions, it's not quite as obvious in this format, but notice about westerly, so from 220 or so up to about 290, and then there's another peak with easterly winds. These are, sort of our densest distributions of high wind speeds, and then also notably we get a number of our highest wind speeds from much more variable in terms of their frequency from north, south predominantly, but can be from any direction. Next slide. So looking at the temporal distribution throughout the year, and here instead of wind speed, we're looking at shear velocity. So basically describes the the vertical gradient of momentum transferred from the wind to the Playa floor, the sediment floor. We have the highest values in the spring, which you would expect living in New Mexico. I think one thing notable here, though, however, is in the summer. If you look at the variability and then outliers in July and August, for instance, we actually have some of our highest values. Typically the mean values are lower during the summer, much lower wind speeds. However, with convective events, thunderstorms, et cetera, get microbursts and outflows and those sorts of things, which lead to, actually some of our highest values. And so, at least locally, sort of punctuated local effects, the highest potential for dust events. Next slide. So if we look at that, again, through time, through the year, and then also look at it by direction, and here again, we're looking at shear velocity. The pattern that I mentioned, looking at the wind speed and direction polar plots, becomes much more obvious here, where we have very pronounced peaks from westerly and easterly direction. As you can see, the westerly winds in the spring, we get some of our, our highest values, and then more scattered once we move into the summer. But also in the spring, we do have fairly pronounced peaks of high values for easterly winds, and some of those also moving into the late spring and early summer. Next slide. So what does this mean in terms of, in situ observations of PM concentrations? So all of the slides we're going to look at here are PM10. So if we look at the Edwarn site first, so this is the closest site to the Playa floor, where they're essentially devoid of vegetation. It also has the longest period of record in terms of the wind observation, at least. And we see this sort of dual peak pattern repeat itself with the PM concentrations. So very concentrated around about 100, 110 degrees. And then from 270 or west, you see some of the highest values, are fairly randomly distributed throughout the rest of the space. We have the highest actually coming from 45 or 50, and then some high values, as well from south and north, but very distinct pattern of east winds and west winds. Next slide. So for the North Playa site, which is the site from the map earlier, that's also north of the interstate, we get a pretty similar pattern, but here we actually get a much tighter clustering for the westerly direction. Some pretty high values and concentrations from the east as well. You can see predominantly westerly here. Next slide. If we look at Road Forks site, which is very close to the interstate, 100 yards or so, at least from the right-of-way, and south of the interstate, we get a similar pattern to North Playa, but a little bit more of those east wind PM concentrations. Still very tight clustering in those two directions. Next slide. So we look at the PM concentrations versus wind speed, and then a little bit of information on direction too, looking at it all together. You can see that the top two panels are the inward and the North Playa site track very similarly in terms of the pattern there. So you could make the argument, without doing fits on these, that there appears to be a pattern with the westerly winds, possibly a bit lower threshold to where you start seeing some dust at those towers, and then a separate curve possibly for the easterly winds. One thing we do notice is that for more or less the same wind speed, the PM concentration be higher for some of the easterly winds when we look at, in the range of the higher wind speeds, looking at 14 to on up meters per second. One interesting thing for the Road Forks Tower, we see that we actually don't have that, even though we have a lot of events that register some PM concentration with westerly winds. We don't have them associated with as high wind speeds typically as the easterly winds, and this is because there was some targeted mitigation efforts there that essentially decreased the fetch to the west, and so there's much more exposure from the south and east for that site. Next slide. So if we look through time, especially given some of the talks that we've seen already, in particular Tom's first off this morning, we might expect to see the highest values this spring. It has been exceptionally dusty, over much of the state, but particularly the southern portion. But actually here, at least for these particular locations, we actually get higher values, and then log scale, so significantly higher in some cases in the summer months. So summer moving into early fall, and these are probably very short in duration and from convective events and storm outflows and such. Also, dust devils should be mentioned. So those could register very high, although not last a particularly long time. And those are more prevalent as the surface heats up. But if we do look at this spring, a couple things I think to notice, which we look at a couple pictures in a minute. So we had significant accident on January 7th, and then another significant accident with fatalities on February 27th, both of which were due to strong winds from the east. I can't use the pointer, but the blue dots in early January going up in the spike. And then again, if you could imagine where February 27th is. And then actually I pulled out and highlighted data from the same day that Tom mentioned earlier. So March 28th, 18th, we had winds from the west. But overall, lower numbers, at least locally at these sites than some of the summer events. Next slide. So we'll look at the east wind events for the spring of 2025. It's caused by backdoor cold fronts. We look, very distinct east wind pattern if we look at the direction for both of them. And then obviously you can see the significant, fairly rapid increase in wind speeds. Next slide, Armando. So we have some cameras set up at these locations. I don't have pictures of the January 7th event because it actually occurred after nightfall. But if we look at the 227 event, so again, east winds. This is the Road Fork site at the far western edge. You can see the arrow in the bottom right pointing in the direction that this camera is looking, so straight down the interstate. We do see, pretty extreme loss of visibility, which worsens through time. The accident actually occurred fairly early in the morning, I think about between 8 and 9, but on this edge of the Playa, we continue to experience decreased visibility throughout much of the day. Next slide. So this is from the North Playa Tower. Again, the arrow shows the general direction that the camera looks, so towards the interstate, more or less, almost straight into the wind at the direction that the wind was coming from on this day. You can see pretty much, a lack of any significant visibility whatsoever. And again, that on and off continue to get worse or slightly better throughout the day as the winds slightly shifted direction. Next slide. So for the west wind events, the typical patterns I think that we're all used to and anticipate and responsible. I believe Tom showed a lot of the satellite imagery of those setups earlier. So your fronts, cold fronts, occluded fronts, etc. Next slide. So we look at a couple examples of those from 3/18 this year, so March 18th. So the same camera looking straight down the interstate, and it's might be difficult to tell, but the dust is actually going away from the camera in these pictures. We do continue to get significantly degraded visibility moving throughout the day here as well. And in terms of the hazard for the interstate, oftentimes that can be a function of which area is getting hit the hardest and emitting the most dust, and then how that's set up in terms of this sort of dual peaks in direction. The next slide. For the other winds, north, south, and other winds, again, these are due to convective events, less frequent, but actually account for fairly large and some of the largest events, but highly variable. Sort of roughly predict the months in which they may occur, but it could happen at any time. Dust devils again with falling here as well. I had a very nice time-lapse video of a dust devil hitting one of these towers, but I couldn't manage to figure out how to embed it Apologies for that. Next slide. Last one. So the next steps, other than elevating the highway, which probably is really the main way to completely minimize the hazard here on I-10 in Lordsburg, Playa, which would be a pretty interesting cost-benefit analysis. I guess depending on the cost that was associated with human life and how long we anticipate that people will still be driving, not automation, et cetera. Anyway, so what are the next steps in reality, barring anything like that? So to develop a synoptic dust climatology, so to pull out these weather patterns, which Robert presented a little bit in this same symposium last year. On doing that, that's an ongoing work. So we've been building slowly a body of enough observations to be able, to stay with some, statistical significance, but what is and is not associated with each type of event. And so Glory, Aeolian, and Robert W. here at the Jornada have been working on that. And then so that'll help us enhance the risk assessment. And then we want to be able to link, those things that we see and that we're used to talking about to the upper atmosphere meteorology. And this is, with the goal of, even though we know roughly, when to anticipate high winds, we can, put out blowing gust warnings, and that we could possibly enhance those by digging a little deeper into the upper atmosphere circulation. And that's something that our colleague Suroj Detal has been working on here at the Jornada. And then, lastly, to use that information, I think everyone here is attuned to the fact that there are dusty days and dust events that it could pose, a hazard, not just long-term health, but, immediate human impacts, but increased outreach and awareness, particularly associated with those sort of weather setups and, when the highest risk may occur. And that's it for me. Thank you for doing the slides, Armando. Again, sorry about the delays, everyone.
Oh, thank you for your presentation. Very informative to see all the variances in the PM10 concentrations. We do have a hand up from Tom Gill.
Oh, yeah, just a real quick question. Those PM10 concentrations you showed on your graphs, over like what time period were those PM10 values averages for?
Those were 15-minute values.
Okay, well, we don't have any other questions. We'll go ahead and go on to our next presentation. We are deviating a little bit from our agenda. We have we have Scott Van Pelt instead of wind erosion in the United States.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry Daniel couldn't be here, but he had some conflicts. And so I'm happy to represent the author team here, 3 of whom are in attendance right now. So we're very happy to be in the symposium and let you know a little bit about what we've been working on here lately. I'd like to acknowledge our funding sources and the people who provided the data for us. And with that, I'll move right along into the next slide. So the wind erosion estimate is outdated. It was about 30 years old when we first started thinking about this study. And we figured it was probably way low considering inflation and other factors. Other literature typically references a single sector and doesn't consider the entire economic impact. And the other thing that's happened in that 30 years is renewable energy. Both wind and solar are both growing rapidly, and they're both affected by dust. Previous study did not account for valley fever, which is a very debilitating disease. It's not reportable in the state of Texas, but New Mexico, Arizona, and California it is. And we really felt like a modern estimate was necessary for policymakers to make informed decisions. We just heard Brandon talk about cost-benefit analysis on things such as elevated roadways. Well, if the cost is high enough, then it's certainly feasible and desirable to go ahead and try to mitigate to our best ability. So we looked at several economic sectors: agricultural cost, household, health impacts, considered valley fever separate from general health impacts. We looked at transportation costs, some of which we just heard about from Brandon a little bit earlier from Tom, as well as wind and solar energy and the cost of mitigation. So let's take a look at agricultural costs that were considered. Pimentel offered a formula for figuring the agricultural cost. And so he found $30 a hectare to replace lost water holding capacity, $100 to replace lost nutrients, and an empirical ratio of about 17 tons per hectare per year. Soil erosion rate and total acres of cropland we got from the National Resource Inventory, and it's saying 11.4 tons per hectare per year in 2017. And the ratio of wind to water erosion is wind erosion accounts for about 42% of the total soil erosion. So that gives us an agricultural cost of about $9.6 billion per year. And again, this is just the cost of water and nutrients and their effect on yield. When we go to the household cost, anybody that's lived through a very dusty spring knows that sand and dust can find their way to the inside of a light bulb in this part of the world. So again, Pimentel offered a cost of a number of acres in three different erosion and dust loading categories: low, moderate, and high. We can figure that southern New Mexico is in the high, probably Maryland and Florida are in the low. And if you take Texas as an overall average, it may be moderate. And it seems like these states are shifting a little bit. This year we had accidents on the highways due to dust visibility impairment in Arkansas. A couple of years ago, we saw 8 people killed in a crash in central Illinois. So areas that we previously considered to be low erosion hazard are, because of periodic drought, becoming medium. So anyway, the cost here consists of cleaning, effects on exterior paint, landscaping, automotive, interior, and laundry. If you've ever put clean laundry out on the line and watched the dust roll in, you realize it's got to come off the line and go right back through the washing machine. Use Tusar and Piper to generate the base estimate of offsite cost. And we identified wind erosion using the NRI again, sorted into low, moderate, and high. Number of households per state was from the U.S. Census. And the offsite wind erosion cost for household and all the categories that were considered is $40 billion per year. That's a lot of cleaning, folks, but when you get dust coming through, it's going to happen. Health cost. This is an area that's really emerging. It's many people have not considered this before, but we see a rush to hospital emergency rooms days after large dust outbreaks, and we're starting to understand some of the effects of dust on human health. So premature deaths from all-cause mortality from dust exposure is counted on about $7.5 million for a value of a statistical life, or VSL, and we'll see this acronym later. So the health cost estimate is $97.5 billion annually in the United States. And this does not include the costs from valley fever or from transportation fatalities, such as was previously discussed. Pachacuawicz et al. In 2019 estimated a $13 billion per year cost from fine and coarse dust from only the southwestern U.S. And that considered hospitalizations from cardiovascular, less the heart attacks, non-fatal acute myocardial infarction, and respiratory causes, and mortality from all causes, including cardiopulmonary, lung cancer, cardiovascular, and also just emergency room visits for asthma. As I said, in the days immediately following a big dust outbreak, the hospitals become very, very busy in this part of the world. Valley fever. So this is another emerging area of interest. Morgan Gorris, who's also in attendance here, found a cost of estimate of valley fever based on reported cases at about $400,000 per case. The number of valley fever cases is taken from CDC. Again, Texas is not a reporting state. We know it's here from veterinary evidence, but very rarely is it reported. 46% of all the cases are attributed to natural dust emissions. That's from Paul Janot in 2012. And the 2017 valley fever cost $2.64 billion, which when added to the general health impact, raises the number just a hair north of $100 billion. Now let's talk about transportation fatalities. It was taken from the Fatality Analysis Reporting System and from the NOAA storm data. So the number of injury only and property damage only crashes from the automotive sampling system, general estimate system, and the National Highway Traffic Administration System crash report sampling system. All crash costs are taken from crash costs for highway analysis from the U.S. Department of Transportation. This includes medical impacts, market impacts, household, insurance, workplace from lost productivity, legal problems, delays, property damage, and quality adjusted life year cost. If you're seriously injured in one of these crashes, or somebody that is the breadwinner in your household is killed, it's a very big impact. So the VSL used for fatal crashes is $7.4 million from FEMA, and 2017 transportation fatality cost is $280 million. And 2017 was the year where we had several fatalities at Lordsburg, Playa. Wind energy. Anybody traveling through the Southwest is increasingly aware of large windmills for electrical generation. We're one of the areas of the country where the wind blows sufficiently hard and frequently to generate electricity and have it be cost effective. So we got the amount of wind energy generated from the new Renewable Energy Data Book. Cost per kilowatt hour from Lazard's levelized cost. Percentage of energy loss from dust as for Fala and Kalub. I should point out that it doesn't take very much dust on a solar panel to greatly reduce the output. So that kind of drives the recommended frequency of wind turbine cleaning from, oh, wait a minute, this is wind, I'm sorry, from REN and OO. And the wind energy loss estimate from the cost of cleaning, et cetera, was $3.9 billion. Getting a little ahead of myself here. Solar energy. I want to go back to the fact that it doesn't take very much dust at all to reduce the efficiency of solar panels, photovoltaics. On the weather station in our yard here, we started having problems keeping batteries charged. And so we went out to take a look at it and took a little bit of Windex and some cotton cloths with us and got the thing snapped right back up. But the dust was not extremely noticeable on the photovoltaics to drop that. So we took a look at the cost of kilowatt hour from the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. They determined the loss percentage from dust as per Kimber et al. And that was supported by Hammond et al. And the 2017 solar energy loss estimate was $243.6 million. And as we continue to see more and more installations throughout the Southwest, that number will no doubt increase as well. Mitigation, the USDA Dust Mitigation Handbook, the National Resources Conservation Service has already spent this money on dust mitigation, working with producers to come up with tillage practices in their fields to limit the amount of dust generated. Wind erosion and dust emission modeling is typically done to help producers choose the least emissive management system possible. It also includes dust mitigation data for Owens Lake. Owens Lake, in 2018, they started to mitigate the lake, and they've spent several $billion so far, and only a portion of what's being spent on mitigation is actually reflected here, because there's private efforts, there's other efforts, mine sites, etc., that we just don't have access to that information. And it also does not include dust mitigation costs from rangeland, projected cost, or research for mitigation. So every year we have scientists working in both university settings and governmental settings, researching, as you've seen presented here today. So the mitigation costs are currently estimated at $260 million annually. So when we add all of these together, we can come up with the final cost. We take a look at the left-hand column here as what Pimentel estimated, and we adjusted that from 1995 to 2017 dollars for comparison. So adjusted for inflation, Pimentel estimated $36.8 billion annually. The number that we came up with was $154.4 billion annually, and this did not consider other categories that we just could not find any information on. And you'll see over here the health effects are by and large greater than half of the total. Here we compare dust storms with other billion-dollar disaster categories, including winter storms, freezing, flooding. We've seen a lot of that in the Midwest this year. Drought, we're right in the middle of a mega drought, so that's continuing to affect us. Wildfires, the last decade has just been devastated with wildfires. Severe storms, such as the tornadoes and some of the larger storms moving through the Midwest this spring already. We see dust storms coming in just underneath tropical cyclones. And 2017 was the year that we chose to do the analysis. And that was a year where we had 17 tropical storms, including hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria. And if you remember anything about Harvey, it just kind of moved in a circle, going out to the Gulf, coming in over Houston, flooding homes, going out to the Gulf, picking up more moisture, coming in and flooding even more homes. So in a normal year, the cost of dust storms may be a little bit closer to that from tropical cyclones. Okay, and here's some other known but not included costs. Most of the time, we did not include these costs because we could not find a consensus of cost associated in the literature. So morbidity being non-fatal human health effects, other than for valley fever, we did not consider. Wind erosion does cost in rangelands. Nick tells us that there's not a whole lot of work that's been done there. Hydrological cost. We know that dust gets deposited on the snowpack, causing it to melt sooner, resulting in inavailability of water for crops in irrigated basins when the crops need them the most, and that's late summer and early fall. Agricultural costs, including damage or loss of seedlings from blowouts and crop plants, and reduced yield caused from the injury to the plants. Cost to aviation. The modern turbofan engines burn much hotter than the previous jet engines. And so that's hot enough so that a turbofan engine flying through a dust cloud can actually melt the dust, causing balance problems inside of the turbine and causing the turbine to have to be rebuilt. Cleaning the plane, as well as flight delays and rerouting due to visibility problems. We also did not consider loss to property value in dust-affected properties and communities. Nobody wants to move someplace where the sky is brown all the time. We also did not consider contamination of land, crops, foodstuffs, and water supplies by dust-borne toxins and pathogens. We do know that many plant and animal pathogens are carried on the dust. Delayed deliveries and canceled events due to dust storms. We heard a little bit from Tom about a soccer match in Juarez that was canceled because one of the teams could not get there. And we had a total of 40 cost categories listed in the supplement to our publication. So many of those also did not have costs associated that we could find corroborative amounts for. So in conclusion, the windblown dust cost is about 4 times greater than previously estimated in 1995. That's a conservative estimate. Ours is also very conservative for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that we simply could not get good numbers for some of the categories that we know are highly impactful on the economy. The other one is when you consider that only about 2 to 3% of the dust is generated in the southwestern United States, global costs must be astronomical. We found that comparable to other natural disasters, wind erosion was right up there with tropical cyclones, and in certain years may actually exceed that of tropical cyclones. So in future research, we need to take a look at what costs are associated with dust storms off of rangelands. We heard from Nick that it's severely moved a lot of sand, and the fine materials no doubt left and have been deposited on people's windshields all over the Midwest and Eastern United States. We need to look at more at the cost of transportation delays. If a highway is closed and traffic is stopped, then that causes supply chain issues with late arriving goods. We don't know what the cost is to railroads, but considering the amount of bearings that have to be greased, I'm going to guess dust gets into those and costs them some money too. And then the general cost of businesses from a number of different factors. And if you'd like to know a little bit more detail, here's the reference to our paper that was recently published in Nature Sustainability. So with that, I'll say thank you and turn it back over to Armando.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Very interesting about the economic costs associated with all those. So estimate, I mean, based on all those assumptions that you guys had left out. So it's pretty cool. So
it was an interesting project. really was.
I'm sorry? Yes, we're going to go ahead and go on to our next presenter, Karin Ardon-Dryer with Texas Tech University, and she's going to be discussing all right, take it away, Karin. And so I'm not hearing you. Yeah, we're still not hearing you, Karin.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
I figure how to turn my cell phone, but I'm not sure. Can you see the full screen, Armando? Or anyone?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Tom. All right, well, good afternoon. My name is Karin Ardon-Dryer. I'm from Texas Tech University, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about a project we've had here at Texas Tech, which is looking on the efficiency of low-cost sensors. We've already heard about particulate matter, so I want to just itinerate that for a little bit. So when we talk about particulate matter, we talk about different sizes of particle. The size that we care about are normally PM10, PM2.5, and PM1. And this is just a reference of how small they are. We have a single stray of hair, and this is sort of a reference of the size. And if you take the diameter of the hair and look at it on the side, these are PM10, particulate matter up to 10 micron, PM2.5, particulate matter up to 2.5 micron, and PM1. All of these sizes are crucial because these are sizes of particle that can penetrate in our body. The smallest one can even go into our lungs and our bloodstream. So it's important for us to understand how many particles we have during a dust storm in order to protect ourselves. And then we heard also from several of the talks earlier that there are consequences of exposing to ourselves to these aerosols. One of the issues we have here in the US is the fact that we have sensor, but not enough. These are just a glance of the amount of sensor and their location for those who measure only PM2.5, only PM10, those who measure both, and some of the improvement CSN site that can measure but every other day, or every 3 days. So we're kind of missing that information. But the biggest issue is we have a lot of gap. We have areas in various states that are prone to dust that we don't have sensors. And we've seen that as an issue where we can see here some of the geos map where we see the path of dust and there's no sensor in that path. So we don't know what were the exposure of these people, how bad this dust was in terms of concentration and the size of the particle that people have been exposed to. You can see them here. You can see it in this 2 animation where the dust passed just in between those sensors. So it has been suggested to use low-cost sensor to monitor these dust events. But how good are these low-cost sensor to monitor these dust events? The unique of our work is the fact that we're basically comparing between these sensors. So if you have seen some of our previous talk, we have our station, Aerosol Research Observation Station, which is located here at Texas Tech on the rooftop of our electric engineering building. And in our unit, we have multiple component of sensor, and I'm going to go over the main one in the next second or so, so you will understand what kind of sensor we use for this comparison and what kind of sensor we have in our station. So we have an EPA grant and we were able to purchase a reference monitor. This is the EDM 180. It's a Grimm or Durig instrument. It measures PM1, PM2.5, and PM10, and also psi distribution, which is a very important aspect if we want to look at how concentration we have of small particles. As part of this project, as part of the funding, we have a network of 42 clarity sensors. These are low-cost sensors with solar panel. Again, they're measuring PM1, 2.5, and 10. and we can spread them, and we have them spread across the city, but we've left 3 sensors here on the site as sort of a reference sensor to continue monitor with our EDM unit. It's part of an NSF project called Air Across Texas, where it's an educational project for high school students, and they get to have these purple air sensor in their house. We again left 3 units in our station as a reference and ability to correlate them and correct those sensors. And we had the model air, which is a quantum Q1 unit. It's borrowed from Professor Raghu, who's a colleague of mine, and he's here at Texas Tech, and he's one of the authors for this presentation. And I should say that both of the clarity and the purple air have been in our station for more than a year now, almost a year for the purple air, and clarity only been placed on the sensor since February 11. And we really wanted to be able to do a comparison between these sensors and between this EDM. Now I should indicate that the EDM is an EPA approved for PM 2.5, and it's a European approved for PM 10. All right, so we decided to look at dust events that occurred during the month of April and March till February, March, and April. Early April, we basically stopped so we can analyze the data for this presentation. And just during that month, we had 10 dust events here. I know me and Tom have this conversation, who has more dust? Tom, El Paso win, but we have some severe dust events. So we can see here in light gray wind speed, in dark gray wind gust, and in light gray here, we have the visibility. And these are just the maximum wind speed and wind gusts that were measured every hour during that period, and the visibility. And I just marked here several dust events that occur where we have an increase in wind speed and decrease in visibility. Looking at the particulate matter during that period, these are the measurements from the EDM. We can see in light gray the PM1, in orange the PM 2.5, and in blue the PM 10. I should indicate that you see that hole not because there were no dust. Actually, we had one of our biggest dust here on April 14, but unfortunately, if you've heard the news, we had a huge manhole explosion here on campus in early March, and our station and all the campus was shut down for a week. So we don't have data, unfortunately. Just to highlight specific events, so I have here 3 stars representing each event, and you can see the hourly changes of particulate matter measured from that EDM. So we can see an increase in particulate matter, and we know these are dust events. It also matches very nicely with the meteorological conditions. So as I indicated, we have 3 purple air sensors, and these are the changes of particulate matter going from PM1, 2.5, and 10 during those periods of time from February to April 4th. And overall, we see that all 3 sensors behave really nice. So we decided to compare between them and create an average of these concentrations that were measured between those sensors. And that's what I'm going to represent, an average of these 3 sensors. We did the same practice for the clarity sensors. Again, we have 3 sensors, but one of the sensors is not behaving perfectly. So for that purpose, we only compare between sensor 1 and sensor 41, and they have good comparison based on PM 2.5 and PM 10 and also PM 1. So we only gonna present 2 of this sensor, and again, they're gonna be average. So I'm not going to be able, because of the time, to show you all the dust events that we've had during the period, but specifically decided to find one event and then a sort of period of time that we had multiple dust events. So starting with the event of February 26, we can see in terms of the meteorological condition, we had an increase in wind speed and wind gust. We had a reduction of visibility up to 8 kilometers, and based on the conditioning going above the 6 meters per second and visibility less than 10 kilometers, we define this event as a dust event. Looking at the PM from the EDM, we can see a large increase in PM 10 concentration, and these bars represent the hourly concentration. We see the PM 10, PM 2.5 in this blue, and in the light blue, we see the PM 1, even PM 1 increased slightly. So now let's look into the comparison between those different low-cost sensor and our EDM. So just so you'll know what to look for, we have here the same period of a day in February 26. So you have here the time, and here you're going to have the concentration. This is the PM1. And the different color represent the different sensor. In black, we're going to have the EDM, which is our reference monitor. In purple, we're going to have the average of the 3 purple air sensors, and we call it purple air raw because it's not corrected. In orange, we're going to have the clarity sensors. Again, they're raw, they're not corrected, and we can see them here. And in green, we're going to have this quantum Q model air PM sensor. All of these sensors at this stage are going to be raw, so we have not corrected them. Looking at PM 2.5, well, PM 1 had some comparison between the sensors. Some were overshooting at the peak compared to the reference monitor. In PM 2.5, we start to see big differences. We see that none of the sensor, at least when they're not corrected, they do not detect the correct concentration for PM 2.5. All of them are undercorrected or not a lower concentration than the reference monitor. And when it comes to PM 10, and we know that this is the biggest issues in a lot of these dust events, both clarity and purple air don't see the dust. They don't see these large particles. And the model air, the quantum Q sensor, not being corrected, still able to detect these large particles and relatively in good correlation to the reference monitor. So we've been playing with correcting these sensors, and so far we've had some good comparison with when we correct the clarity sensor. So you can see that when we were able to correct the clarity sensor, we found a good agreement between the PM 2.5 concentration of the clarity to the EDM. And again, we have not finished making correction for the model air or for the purple air, so we cannot determine yet if they're good. We can't even correct clarity or pulpra L for PM10. They're just off. Every attempt we tried, we were unable to find a good way to correct them. We can push them a bit, but they really cannot detect the PM10 concentration. So this was one event, and even after we correcting at least the lead concentration, we can find some good comparison, but when it comes to PM10, don't trust it. All right. Another period that we measured during March 1st to March 6th, there were 5 different dust events just during those few days. Several of them even happened in the same day. The lowest visibility during those events was 3.2 kilometer, which means all of these events were defined as dust event. So looking at the entire period for PM10 concentration, we see overall, again, the model air does seem to have good correlation. Unfortunately, we did not have measurement during this time, and we're not sure what happened here, which is very interesting to us, and we might need more data. This was the one event that we saw it's overshoot both for PM10 and for PM 2.5. And this is still something we're going to be working on to try to understand, is it possible that this sensor has an issue above a certain concentration? Because overall, we found it to be reasonable good to detect the PM10, but again, we'll have to figure out what happened here. In terms of PM 2.5, the corrected clarity does seem to have a good comparison to a reference monitor, and it can detect the dust event. Clarity without correction, I do not recommend using it. Purple air, it's great for air pollution, which is anthropogenic. I don't recommend using it for dust. We will see after we'll be able to finalize the correction if we will be able to improve maybe the PM 2.5. I doubt we'll have any big improvement for the PM10. And if someone has some ideas on how to help us improve these PM10 concentration for these 2 sensors, the clarity and the purple air, by all means, feel free to contact me because we are debating those things now. So it's not perfect, but we're getting close to it. We still don't have the best sensor, but we're hoping that with some additional analysis, we might be able to determine at least one of these sensors that seems reasonable and that should be used in dust region or in semi-arid region and arid region where we should expect some of these dust events. All right, so just to summarize, because I know my time is limit, I hope and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with DANA, Dust Alliance for North America. So consider joining us. We have a monthly webinar, and we're always welcome more speakers. So if you would like to give a talk in one of our webinars, feel free to contact us. And I want to acknowledge John and Melody, the two students. Each one of them is responsible for a different project. John is responsible for the EPA project. Melody is responsible for the NASA project, for the NSF project. And again, acknowledge EPA and NSF. Without their funding, we would not be able to do this kind of work. And thank you for your attention. And if there's time, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Karin. Very interesting. Set the sensors and how we're evolving to be able to custom and be able to. So I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and segue to our last presenter. And so Los Alamos National Laboratory.
Okay, excellent. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. All right, thanks so much for allowing me to join in today. Happy Earth Day. My name is Gorris. I'm a staff scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and excited to share some of our work in collaboration with several different universities, as well as the New Mexico Department of Health, looking into valley fever in New Mexico, and also this idea about the dust-borne atmospheric transport hypothesis. So I'm just going to launch into it. So valley fever, or formerly known as coccidioidomycosis, is an infectious fungal disease that's caused by the fungi Coccidioides. Humans or other animals can contract valley fever when they inhale these fungal spores. About 40% of people will ultimately develop symptoms of valley fever. Initially, the disease starts like many other diseases, like an influenza-like illness. So you'll have fever, rash, chills, while the fungus basically is growing in your lungs. And then if your body cannot suppress the growth, the fungus can disseminate to other parts of your body, cause really nasty things like skin lesions, and unfortunately be fatal. Valley fever doesn't spread from person to person. Cases are a result of environmental exposure. And this is a fungus that's naturally found in the environment. It actually serves as a decomposer, primarily of animal proteins. It's thought to be around 40 to 50 million years old, so quite possibly kind of evolved along with the need to decompose animal proteins. On the right-hand side is an image of Coccidioides taken from the CDC website. So you're looking at a microscopic image of the fungal strands right there. And each one of those barrel shapes are the fungal spores. So very interestingly, valley fever cases are increasing, and we're wondering why. Is this a result of different environmental drivers, like warming temperatures, perhaps just increased disease awareness, or maybe a combination of several things? So here we're looking at a bar graph of cases from reportable states. So not all states are required to report cases, but the states that do are shown here. So at the beginning of our time series, we're looking at around 2,500 cases. In recent years, we're looking at about 20,000 cases. So Coccidioides, like I mentioned, is a decomposer in the environment. So it grows in arid and semi-arid soils in North and South America. Here I'm just showing kind of the first part of the life cycle. In stage 1 here, it's growing in its environmental form. So it's in those heightened fungal strands in the environment. These are going to be microscopic. So you're not going to usually see any of this with your eye. It grows when there are enough nutrients available and moisture in the environment, which is counterintuitive since it's in the desert, but it does need a little bit of moisture. And then when it becomes environmentally stressed, its mechanism for survival is to break apart or autolyze into those arthroconidia, or the fungal spores. So that's what you're seeing in stage 2. And then any type of soil disturbance, whether that's like digging in the dirt or a high winds event, could waft these spores into the air. And that's when a human or another animal could breathe them in and become sick. And then the fungus, it's quite fascinating. It's called a dimorphic fungus. So it actually changes into its secondary form, which is a yeast, when it's inside of the host. And I'm not showing that phase of the life cycle here. Now, an important part of the life cycle that is missing from this diagram that we made a few years back is that rodents likely play an important role in the life cycle. So this is kind of an updated environmental exposure life cycle of Coccidioides flow diagram that we made, again showing the mycelial growth in the soil on the left-hand side, and then following the arrows, we're depicting the spore formation, and then the spores breaking apart and becoming aerosolized, when then a human or another animal like a rodent can breathe them in. And then essentially the host dies, the rodent dies, and the fungus is already there in the rodent lungs, ready to help decompose the animal and then return back into the soil. So interestingly, there's been more and more research testing rodent burrows and rodents themselves for the presence of the pathogenic fungi, and indeed we have found it. So this was the first valley fever endemicity map that was created based on skin test studies from the late 1940s from military recruits that entered a naval base in San Diego. They essentially tested them for reactivity to see if they had been previously exposed to coccidioides, and then went back and mapped that reactivity to their home county location. And this was our best guesstimate of the endemic area for quite a long time. You'll notice New Mexico is highlighted on this map, as well as a lot of the state of Texas. And the CDC had used this map up until about 2019. A few edits had been done to the map. Some counties in Northern California were added based on archaeological digs that resulted in valley fever outbreaks. Same with northeastern Utah from Dinosaur National Monument archaeological outbreak, and then southeastern Washington State from someone who fell off their ATV, became sick. The CDC in Washington State Department of Health went out there and tested the soils and found coccidioides. So this was our best guess for a while. Now the CDC has since updated the map to this one in orange, showing the orange swaths as where coccidioides is most likely to live. And then there's a potential range that's like in the hashed yellow color. I put some gray bounds around this area just to help your eye here. But largely estimating the southwestern US as endemic, as well as the western US as the potential range. So again, New Mexico, largely depicted as endemic, and as well as Texas. So I mentioned that people and animals contract valley fever by exposure to dust, but one of the large questions in the community is really what scale of dust exposure matters. Is it a highly localized exposure that we're not really going to catch on any monitoring stations where you are, directly digging in the dirt and exposing yourself? Is it the ambient concentrations, or is it these long-range transport events like dust storms that's kicking it up and largely spreading it? Now we more or less have support that each of these kind of scales of dust exposure matter to some extent, but it's been difficult to really highlight one of these as being the most important. And another question in the field is, how does coccidioides travel in the air? It's often mentioned that this is a dust-borne disease or dust-associated disease, but really we don't have an understanding of how it travels in the air, largely because it's a very difficult thing to measure or analyze. But I think there's ultimately two different options. Are the arthrochonidia breaking off from the hyphal strand and just traveling as a free-floating bioaerosol? Or are they somehow physically attached to dust? So I think if we think about it as a free-floating bioaerosol, some important things to note are that these arthrochonidia are about 2 to 5 microns in length. So they're quite small. They could potentially travel quite far. They're also light, so they might stay in the air for longer. They could also be quite easily easily emitted this way. And then you'll note I depicted in this diagram kind of these little hateful fragment wings on the ends. So this could almost act as like an aerodynamic resource to the spore and act as a floating mechanism. Or is it attached to dust? Now, this would provide the benefit of some protection from UV radiation and desiccation. The spore itself could be binding to the dust particle via electrostatic forces, or it's often noted that these spores have like a sticky outer membrane, so it could just be kind of stuck onto the dust particle. And then I think this has really important implications for human exposure, because then you're essentially breathing in both particulate matter and a pathogen. So it's kind of a double whammy on your lungs and could essentially prime you for infection. So I have been working with Dr. Bridget Barker at Northern Arizona University on writing kind of a hypothesis paper on this. I think it's really important to understand how coccidioides is traveling, because it has important implications for both atmospheric transport and human health impacts. If we could say, you know, it's a dust-borne disease, then ultimately we could model the atmospheric transport as dust and make assumptions about human exposure that way. So heads up for our hopefully upcoming hypothesis article in Medical Mycology. Spoiler, I think it's dust-borne. Okay, so I now want to just briefly touch on another paper that we have in review looking at valley fever in New Mexico. So valley fever has actually been recognized to be endemic to New Mexico for over 80 years now. As I showed earlier, it was depicted as endemic in that original skin test map. But we only report like less than 100 cases per year in the state. Valley fever became a reportable disease in New Mexico in 2006. And interestingly, in 2010, there was a knowledge, attitude, and practices survey sent out to licensed physicians in New Mexico. And it revealed that only 28% of these physicians that responded were confident in their ability to diagnose valley fever in New Mexico, and 30% were confident in their ability to treat valley fever. So we might have some underlying issues of disease awareness, both among the community and physicians, and be underreporting our disease cases. So a group of us interested in valley fever throughout the state of New Mexico have been working on this paper that's in review in Pathogens that reviewed valley fever electronic health records from the New Mexico Department of Health from 2006 to 2023. So I just want to share some of the highlights that we found from this study. In total, we reviewed 1,541 cases over the 2006 to 2023 time period. We averaged 86 cases per year in the state, and a graph of the case counts is on the top right-hand side in red. We're looking at 2006 to 2023 cases. And you'll note that cases increased by about 300% from the first 5 years of the disease being reported in the state to the last 5 years. Although we only had hospitalization information for about 40% of our cases, of those, 70% of our cases were admitted to the hospital. So that tells me that the cases were pretty severe. It looks like my PowerPoint might have just gone away. Hold on one moment. Oops, let's see here. All right, let's get this back. All right, hopefully y'all should see that again. Sorry, I guess Lionel did a PowerPoint update. Okay, so the median range, median age for our cases was 55 years old. On the right-hand side on the bottom, we're showing age stratified mean annual valley fever incidence rate by age group. So you'll note that higher ages had higher levels of incidence. So this is a disease that's affecting our older populations in New Mexico. This is a little bit of a different story than California and Arizona, which are regarded as like the top 2 highest incidence rates. And they have age populations affected that are in like the 40 to 50 year range. Let's just try the PDF here since it seems like PowerPoint's having an issue. All right, continuing on. Okay, so males accounted for 57% of our cases and ultimately were more likely to contract valley fever compared to females in our cohort. We also found that people who identified as American Indian or Alaskan Native had 3.2 higher odds of contracting valley fever than white people. If you look at a time series of monthly valley fever cases on the top right-hand side, you'll see cases were about the same from 2006 up to 2018. Then we saw a large peak in cases in 2019. The reasons there are still unclear to me. It's something we're looking into. Cases then fall off after that. It could be a factor of COVID-19, but there also could be some climate conditions at play there. And then cases peak again in 2022. On the bottom graph, we're looking at the seasonality of cases in New Mexico. Ultimately, there's no strong disease seasonality. Cases were relatively lower in the late summer to midwinter timeframe. So again, still looking into if there will be a seasonality that pops out. In California, we see a unimodal seasonality that follows their kind of wet and dry season. And in Arizona, we see a bimodal seasonality that follows their kind of bimodal precipitation patterns with Pacific storm tracks and monsoonal rain. So since we do receive monsoonal rain here in New Mexico, I would expect it to be a bit of a bimodal signal. We might just not be seeing anything because cases are so low. When we look at a map of mean annual cases over our time period, it largely resembles a population map, which is not unusual for epidemiology studies. Where we have more people, we have more cases. But if we calculate disease incidence or cases per 100,000 population, we get a bit of a different story. The higher levels of incidence in the state are in the southwestern corner and also McKinley County up in the northwestern corner. Some recent limited surveillance data also supports endemicity in the state. So Dr. Salazar-Ham analyzed some rodents from the University of New Mexico Museum of the UNM Museum of Southwestern Biology, looking at rodents collected from 1994 to 2019 and found a few of them positive. Those are depicted as the circles on the map. And then Dr. Adriana Romero Olivares and her team at New Mexico State University sampled at the Jornada experimental range in 2023 and did find positive soil samples. That location is depicted as the square on the map. She found about a 6% positivity rate in the soils she analyzed. She looked at both topsoil and rodent burrow samples, but found no positivity difference. And then between the different ecosystems she sampled, the grasslands had the highest positivity rates compared to the mesquite shrublands and ecotone regions. In conclusion, I think it's safe to say that contracting valley fever is a risk associated with dust exposure. And the question right now is, should we consider valley fever to be an airborne pathogen or a dust-borne pathogen? I feel that we have enough support to say that New Mexico may be the third most endemic state for valley fever, following Arizona and California. It's a little bit hard to compare to some of the other states like Texas, who does not report their cases. But I think some increased soil and rodent surveillance, as well as enhanced epi surveillance, will help kind of delineate who is at risk for contracting this disease in New Mexico. And then I think it would be fascinating to look into whether there are features in New Mexico that make the fungus less virulent than California and Arizona, where historically we've had the highest cases. So I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Morgan. It's a very interesting presentation, valley fever, and how endemic it is here in New Mexico. Interesting to see how endemic it's spreading. That was pretty compelling. So does anybody have any questions for Morgan? I can see that we do have a couple other questions in the chat. I don't know if let's see, we had one that was during the break, and it was from Brian Scott, and I'm kind of suspecting it's for Dr. Nick Webb's. As far as would your model be able to assign a roughness to solar fields, and can they reduce the dust emissions? That's our first question, I think, for Dr. Nick Webb. I don't know if Brian is still on the line and wanted to clarify if that was for Dr. Webb. Nah. Maybe we can go on to our next question. We don't see Dr. Webb here, so we'll go on to our next question. Let's see. And this is for Scott Van Pelt from Alan Smith. I'm just wondering if any and
you broke up. I'm having trouble hearing the question, Armando. Could you please repeat the question?
Yeah. And so Alan Smith was wanting to know if the costs that were estimated, if the
again, you broke up right in the middle of it. I lost everything after.
Scott, it's in the chat. I don't know if you can see it in the chat. The question was did we evaluate the role of biodiversity loss and ecosystem health costs evaluated in the costs?
No, we didn't. There's very little information on wind erosion and dust effects on biodiversity changes, and so that was not one of the costs categories.
And there was another question, follow-up question. Actually, I think it was for Morgan. Yeah, we have a couple of questions from Morgan. One from Dr. Gill. Just want to know how long Anthrocondia, the spores that can survive and be viable after formation within the soil, waiting to be exposed to a host or attached to a flying dust particle. I guess how long it's been.
Hey, that's a great question. So we can't say for sure, but Aunt Gill at CSU Bakersfield has been repetitively sampling the same site near Bakersfield and found positives for, I think, almost 10 years now. So that provides some evidence that it could be around for a while. And then there was also that outbreak at Dinosaur National Monument associated with an archaeological dig from a midden. Now, I don't know how old they estimated that midden to be, but I mean, I would guess hundreds of years. So I think if the conditions are right, it could persist in the soils for a long time. And possibly, even enter a dormant phase when it doesn't have enough nutrients. And then Armando, I think there was another question. So since I'm unmuted, from Alan, does pre-existing conditions play a role in hospitalizations and severity? Yes, most definitely. Folks who are immunocompromised are more likely to contract valley fever and are more likely to have a severe form of the disease. So thanks for the questions.
Great. Thank you for answering those, Morgan. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. For everyone, just to thank them. Symposium, so each and one of you who've on Earth Day, so happens to be, so and still keep pushing to see if we can be able to have a hybrid symposium if everything can work out in the future. But at the very least, together, no, there's no there's all we can do is just work through the technical difficulties. So no harm done on all those glitches that we had. So all is good. But if anything, know anybody that wants to learn more about our dust symposiums, want to review our videos, we're going to go ahead and post these on YouTube, and I'm proud to say that our dust symposiums are some of the most viewed YouTube items on our department YouTube account. So I mean, we're definitely our top. Thank you again, and so just if we can be able to get this word out to the most vulnerable, that's our main goal, and continue to do the good work in each and one of our own capacities. And with that being said, I appreciate you all coming together today and forming this symposium. Stay tuned for our next symposium. We'll try and shoot for another fall symposium if everything works out in that regard. But again, thank you, and have a nice rest of the Earth Day today. Take care. Bye.
Armando. Bye, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.